Thanks for tuning in to the Spread Your Wingspan podcast.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jenny.
And we're your hosts, two friends who immediately bonded over our secret smut addictions. So join us as we journey together through our favorite romance and fantasy stories and discuss all things kinks, female pleasure, taboos, and more.
Make sure to check out the show notes for any spoiler alerts and content warnings. We're happy you're here. Let's get to today's pod. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jenny.
We are in a different location today.
We are.
We had to do a little move around, and I'm excited.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody is like a loyal YouTube viewer and they're going to notice or not.
Well, maybe. We do have some people watching on YouTube. Thank you, subscribers. We have a few. I think that more people will look back as they find us in season 2, and they'll be like, huh, that's different.
Yeah.
When they're binging season 1 of the Spread Your Wingspan podcast.
Manifesting it right now.
You know it.
This is going to be a fun one because this is a book that I have had to swallow my excitement for and actually not talk to you about too much because I wanted you to read it so badly. But I actually think I sold it to you less than other books I wanted you to read badly for that reason.
So I have commentary on that. Since I've been editing our recordings, you have mentioned this book at least 3 times, and it just wasn't going in my brain to be like, Sarah really wants me to read this. Even though you've said you're right, you have not hard sold this one like some other ones. Sarah Simone, you have to read this under duress. But yeah, I was editing, maybe 3 episodes back, and I was like, gosh, darn it, you said something in that podcast that totally foreshadowed the experience, but I didn't pick up on it. You've been very clever about it.
I'm so glad to hear that because it actually has required a lot of conscious in the moment, what words will you say, Sarah? I had to really think of that. Normally I can kind of fly off the cuff a bit more.
Yes.
I think part of that was because I knew the length of what I was asking you to get into, which is, and also they're 2 incomplete series. So I know you hate an incomplete series. She's fast at churning out the books, though. She's faster than Sarah J. Maas, I would say.
Quality, though?
As I said, I think one of the hints I dropped is that I believe her writing is getting better with time, not worse.
Fabulous. Then yeah. I'm not mad at an unfinished series.
Okay. So this series, the From Blood and Ash series, we're talking about From Blood and Ash, the first book in that series today for everybody. So that we can update you.
Not in our inner worlds. Just dove right in.
You can name the book. Is 5 books so far.
6.
The 6th is a retelling of the first book from Castile's point of view.
Okay.
/ Hawk.
Oh, interesting. But are they read in order, or did that get published later?
It was published later. It was published as the 6th.
Oh, so you're going to have to tell us and the readers what order to read them.
You should read it as the 6th.
Okay.
There's stuff happening concurrently, and that is happening in present time in the series, but it's very minor. Most of it is memory flashbacks.
Oh, this is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Don't want to pause here too long, but that's neat.
So and then the prequel series, which she's actually finishing first. She started it second. She's finishing it before the other series. Okay. I believe for really important plot reasons.
You've mentioned this just slightly. I'm getting that now.
I want to spend a little time at the end of the pod talking about it, and I'll try really hard not to spoil things, which is I prefer it. I think it is sensational. That is 5 books so far, and the 6th is coming out, I think, in September-ish, around the time things are happening in my life.
All right.
So, yeah, very cool. So I was it was basically me recommending you read the entire Sarah J. Maas catalog, essentially, right?
Which I did to you, so I feel like this is fair.
But also, to be fair, I, read visual books, and that goes fast, but it's this, I'm recommending hours and hours of audiobook to you.
Yes, but also I read them I'm now at 1.45x speed.
Oh, you're one of those people.
I am now. Have we talked about this?
No.
Brief pause. So since you and I started the podcast and we've had our syllabus of reading, I think all of them I've audioed. And I think because I've upped my listening time and I'm just constantly ducking in, I'll read 30 seconds at a time if I have to, just because I'm I want to know. My brain is recalibrating. I used to read at a solid 1.2
I can't even do that.
Because as soon as I discovered that you could do that, I was like, ooh, could I get through this faster? I'm now up to the nonfiction book I told you about earlier that I'm reading, that maybe we'll read later for the pod, 1.45. So either narrators are getting slower, or my brain is absorbing new reading superpowers because I'm hanging out with Super Reader over here. You're just rubbing off on me.
That's like a level I couldn't even get to. Like my auditory processing is way slower. But part of the reason I don't listen to audiobooks as much. Yeah.
But you visually read
my visual processing is insane.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah. I'm a much more visual learner. I have a lot of trouble. Like I have to really like take my time. My husband listens to like podcasts, either 1.25 or 1.5, and sometimes he'll be doing something and he'll have it playing out loud, and I'm like, it hurts me. I'm like, yeah, turn it off. You have to turn it off. Like, it's so upsetting to me. So, anyways, I'm very impressed. Love that.
Yeah. And so, anyway, that is just to sign off on. Sign me up for 6 more or 12 more books. However many it is.
So, I came across this book because it was one of those like on Instagram, like people like, if you like Sarah J. Maas, you'll also like this author. And I actually think Sarah had acknowledged and thanked Jennifer L. Armentrout in her acknowledgments of one of her books. So I was like, okay, they're like compatriots, like, you know, this would probably be in the vein, in the romantasy, in the style I want. And then I find out it's vampires. And dear listeners, you know that like vampire fiction and I have a deep, loving history. I took a class on it in college. I'm fascinated because of that class by tracking how the figure of the vampire changes in literature through time. And I'm like, this is the newest iteration. Gotta read it. And was like super obsessed. So, I'm so excited you finally read it.
Yeah, I read it. And I will say, this was one of my notes. Like, I am happy to read vampire stuff. I do not have the same level of obsession, and that might be too strong of a word, but
it is, but
or just like
fascination,
yes, I do not have the same level of fascination as of right now. Who knows, maybe this series will change my mind. So the vampire elements of it for me weren't the biggest draw, but the way that she's writing it with the character development and how in this first book you end up finding out kind of what's behind the veil, literally, what is happening that you were like, oh, I knew something was fishy there, but you don't. I was surprised.
Me too.
I was surprised. And if I can be surprised by the secrets unfolding in a way that I wasn't expecting, then sign me up. If you can pull one over on me and delight me in the process, sign me up.
And she's great at that. Agreed. And I would say that kind of continues in a way, but it becomes much more mythological. Cool. And the mythology you're going to love in the following books.
Great.
It kind of, the vampirism and the mythology kind of like start blending, and it becomes more this separate thing. So we will talk about that later, Great. But I actually wouldn't even really say this, it's like I wouldn't even say it's a vampire series.
I'm getting that, because there do seem to be other elements at work, other types of characters. I don't know how much. I mean, I guess so far when we've talked about books, there are some spoilers. I think we say like we are going to discuss the book. So I'm just going to say it, guys. Pause now. Revisit later if you don't want spoilers for From Blood and Ash from Jennifer L. Armentrout. The where they weren't called the Wolven. There you go. But in my brain, they're werewolves.
Yeah. But they're also kind of not.
But they're also kind of not. And like the vampires are vampires, but they're also kind of not. And then there's not the Ascended, but what's the prince? He's a something else.
They're Atlanteans.
Like that's also like a vampire, but not. But like better than a vampire?
Correct.
So this is where I have some questions that I need clarified.
I don't know if I can answer them without spoiling things.
Great. And that's fine. That's an answer in and of itself. So that is one thing that I was like, ooh, we're not just in vampire land. We're not just in traditional vampire land. There's like maybe an other vampire situation. And
there's also zombies, kind of.
Well, when I read your synopsis, which I should probably let you read, I didn't pick up on that, but that makes sense because that's what makes the Craven different than the Ascended.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Cool. Well, then maybe I'll just let you go into your synopsis.
I was kind of like, this synopsis is a little clunky, so.
No, I loved it.
Okay.
I love it.
I was feeling self-conscious. All right. Penelope, also known as Poppy, is the maiden, chosen by the gods and born in a shroud. She has spent most of her life in gilded prison, forced to be silent, interact with few others, and do the bidding of the Duke and Duchess who watch over her. She lives in the kingdom of Solace, a land of people forced to submission by strict religious rule and the fear they feel of the Craven, a zombie/vampire hybrid that haunts the woods outside of their city. The elite are known as the Ascended, with black eyes and mysterious predilections who have been, quote, blessed by the gods with long life through a religious rite known as the Ascension. Poppy's fate is to bring forth a new era of ascensions, and she mostly accepts her fate, except for when she's learning combat with her guard Victor, sneaking off with her one friend Tawny, or venturing to a pleasure house known as the Red Pearl, where she gets mistaken for another woman and experiences her first kiss with the dashing guard known as Hawk Flynn. Hawk soon joins the ranks as one of her guards and protectors, and while Poppy battles her fate and her desires with Hawk by her side, she embarks on a life-changing adventure where everything is truly not as it seems.
Dun, dun, dun. That was a beautiful synopsis. Also, can we just discuss that the pleasure house is called the Red Pearl?
It's right.
It's so funny. It's so perfect.
She's funny.
She's
Jennifer
hilarious.
Armentrout is funny.
Yes.
I think that's one of the greatest strengths of hers as a writer, actually.
It keeps the stuff that can be arduous in mythology from getting too much. I really appreciate that. Also, note for our audiobook listeners, halfway through this book, I was like, this narrator sounds really familiar. And I had to see who it was. Same narrator as is Nesta's book, A Court of Mist and Fury.
A Court of Silver Flames.
A Court of Silver.
Yeah. Nesta.
Yeah. It was Nesta. Anyway, this narrator's voice is Nesta's voice to me. And so I had to disconnect the two because Poppy is Poppy.
I can't see the Nesta voice being Poppy's voice.
Well, I will also say, I hope I'm not conflating this, but like as soon as I saw that she narrated the Sarah J. Maas one, I was like, oh, is this Nesta to me? But the dramatization of Nesta on audiobook is really like fraught and weighty and emotional. So it does work.
Okay.
But I was just like, this sounds familiar. So.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because, Poppy's 18. And she's very innocent and naive in many ways. And so I kind of, when I read the book, I read it with this almost like slightly childish voice.
Yes. Agreed.
And Nesta, I think, had just this really like sultry, like womanly, gorgeous tone.
Especially after she came out of the cauldron. She was just like,
oh yeah,
full of all the darkness.
We love Nesta. What a messy bitch.
We love a good messy bitch.
Content warnings for this episode. There are not many. Content warnings for the book, I would say. It is a relatively violent book and series. I think Jennifer writes action and violence very well. So, and I'm a person, as you guys know, who's pretty squeamish about that stuff. So I hope you can take me saying that I really enjoy this book as cosign that I think you can hang with the violence. But it is there. And then blood play happens. It's very brief at the end of this book, and it is a lot more prominent in the following books.
I was wondering that. Yeah.
And it's enjoyable.
Sarah's yes.
But if you're squeamish about that, be warned.
Does it go any further than typical vampire stuff?
No. Then yeah, I would say it's even milder, actually. And like most vampire stories, it's described as a very pleasurable thing.
Yeah.
So, with, the exception of a couple instances where it's complicated, but it's not sexual in those instances. So you're not going to be caught off guard.
Yeah. I do also think to agree with you that the way that she writes the action and the violence, the action is an excellent pace. I think it has really good payoff, as in like, why did she lead me through this violent episode? Like, it has purpose. I didn't feel that it was
unlike
gratuitous.
the hand getting chewed off. It's like the opposite of that. Because there's some really tough stuff that happens, but it always serves a purpose.
Yes, and adds to the emotional tension and kind of the
stakes.
The stakes, yeah. Thank you. And even though some pretty bloody, gory things happen, it's not gratuitous.
Agreed.
It all has a purpose to the story.
Yes, and it's part of the world building.
Yes.
Because the violence is inherent to this world.
Yes.
And it's part of what makes it so compelling that you are so misled alongside Poppy as the reader. For 90% of the first book, you are like, yeah, this is the way the world is. And then, again, the veil gets pulled over your head and you're like, oh, shit.
This is embedded in the actual society in which we are thrown.
Which is the main theme I think I want to talk about today.
Great.
Which is the main thing of this series is how tyranny works, really. And it becomes again much more mythological. It's definitely not like she's not taking a nail to this point and hammering it constantly. I don't even know if that was her main goal. But I think the real takeaway is, like, how do entire societies of people get wrangled into submission under a violent and tyrannical rule?
Yeah. Do you want to answer the question?
Well, what I was thinking about is, misinformation, the erasure of history, fear and constant threat as distractions, and religion as law.
Or brute force.
And brute force, absolutely, which I think, falls maybe under the fear and threat category, but in this, so it comes both from the craven, this like mysterious outside force, and from within.
Yes.
In the oppressors and the overseers as like penal, brutal punishment, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think the great thing about how she weaves the story is, like, almost immediately that the craven are bad, and the craven are outside, like physically outside the walls. What is it called? The rise? The rise. But you learn as you go that those walls really aren't keeping evil out. They're also, like, containing.
Nor is the government. Yeah.
Yes. And so, I do think that this is satisfying my Sarah J. Maas annoyance.
Yes.
With the Third Crescent City.
Yes.
I was like, finally, we're getting back to some good world building, some good character development, some fun surprises.
Yes.
Yeah. Putting that together now, I really wanted a classic SJM, like, surprise reveal at the end of Crescent City 3, and I did not get it.
Instead it was...
And I had a gaping hole in my soul waiting for
black
one.
hole? Where there's a robot boy? Other themes present are how patriarchy seeks to control young women by weaponizing virginity and through ignorance and lack of education.
The whole thing about Poppy being the maiden, capital letters, veiled, protected, sheltered. I mean, controlled. She is the embodiment of patriarchy controlling virginity.
Yes.
And again, a lot of subtext here that you could explore in your read, but I really loved that, like, she's veiled. She's not allowed to talk to people. They're
not allowed to look at her.
Not allowed to look at her. She also has this other, like, I'm forgetting what they call it. Her power? Do they call it
her gift?
Her gift.
Yeah.
And so, I thought that was really interesting because you get a sense of what her gift is. It's a type of healing gift. But I also started to think about, well, she has to keep her gift a secret, and how that can just be a straight line to, like, her sexuality. Yes. How it has to be protected and used only in certain ways, and only under certain pretenses, and only by certain people. So, there's a lot wrapped up in patriarchy protecting virginity for me.
And obviously the patriarchy is upheld by men and women.
Yes.
And, and
this is in all societies.
Correct. And this is very well explored in this book, I think.
Agreed.
Awakenings, sexual, obviously. So there's, I think, both a self-led awakening, which we see in this character arc of Poppy, which is beautiful and so empowering and just a delicious, juicy part of this book. Mm-hmm. But then there's also awakening of the rude variety. A rude awakening.
Yes.
When you are slapped in the face, where the rug is pulled out from underneath you, where your world is turned upside down. And this kind of reminds me of The Truman Show. Mm-hmm. On the end of that movie, where he's like, oh, this is a television show.
And everybody's been watching me this whole time. And they know what's going on, and I don't.
Yes. And I'm a fool.
Yes. Yeah, I think 100% she comes to that realization. Not even kind of before the end of the book. She still gets another kind of rug pulled out from under her, but her coming into her own. And I love the physical use of the veil. Like, she's veiled all the time. There's a scene where, she's with her maid?
Her friend, but she's like, her like handmaid, essentially. Yeah.
Right. Tawny. So when they're in their rooms, like, she removes the veil, and then when Hawk later is like, I don't want to, like, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to a veil, and she's like, well, I'm not supposed to take it off, and he's like, well, we're in your room,
and you take it off in front of Tawny, and she goes, I know.
So
and
then
she, like, purposely doesn't take it off.
Yeah, but then eventually she does, and so there's this whole thing of her, like, trying out the removing of the veil, which I think is a very prophetic thing. Like, oh, can I take this off? Do I need to be hidden?
Who am I when I take it off?
Who am I? Who gets to see me? Who gets to interact with me? What does that even mean? Because she's barely interacted with anybody.
She's like the most homeschooled kid. Not even like it's and there, a lot of the humor of the preceding books comes from, again, slight spoiler, but she interacts with a lot more people in the following books and is not sheltered. And a lot of times she's like, did I say hello correctly? Like, and everyone's like, what? And she's like, I felt really awkward saying hello to that person. And they're like, yeah, you did fine. It's these really cute, humorous moments reminding you of like, this is her first year of life speaking to other people, even though she's 18 and she speaks very eloquently and is very smart.
Yeah. Being outside of the protection of this castle.
She was reborn. Yes. Really. And so she's got a lot in her that's like very babyish, but not in like an infant way, but in a very just like, she's got a lot of underdeveloped
social skills here.
Yes, and it's humorous. It's very sweet and funny.
Yeah.
Last theme is power of choice.
Takes Poppy a long time to learn that she, as an autonomous, as a finding her autonomy human being, can make her own choices, because that's another skill she has to develop. She just has no concept like, oh, do I get to choose to do this? Because she's been so indoctrinated, you are the maiden. You, not only is she going to ascend, but like her ascension, she is told, is going to save people or like start this process for people. And it's still kind of murky. I'm assuming through the later books, I'll learn exactly
there's a reason it's murky.
Because she also learns that there was another maiden. Usually, like, they were the only two and they're chosen. Which also
chosen by the gods.
Chosen by the gods.
Born in a shroud is when you're born like on call. You're born in your amniotic sac. Which is a real thing that happens. And so in this world, that is even more rare than it is in our world. I think it's like 1 in 80,000 in our world. I'm not sure if that's the actual statistic. But yes, so it has happened once before, allegedly.
But then we learn later on that this maiden that was chosen, and essentially you're led to believe had kind of the same sheltered whatever, she's then told that this maiden didn't ascend, but we don't talk about it. And so there's a mystery around like, well, what does this mean? What is my gift? Why didn't this person ascend? I have a theory that, I don't want to talk about my theory. I don't want to talk about the theory. I want to find out. I don't want to look at Sarah while I say it.
Anyway. I'm going to have to try so hard today. I'm going to be like this the whole time, you guys.
This might be a really short one just so that Sarah feels like firm in her, I didn't give any spoilers for the rest of the series. That's okay.
Jenny knows, like, I hate spoiling things for readers. Like, a lot of the time when Jenny texts me as she's reading something, I will just send the eyeball emoji.
Like, do.
Or a smiley face. And you do a better job, I think, of using words and not spoiling things, but, like, I just have to, like, I'm like, shut it down. Like, I just can't.
You do great.
Thank you.
And I get really annoyed at spoilers. I think on this podcast, we posit the whole thing that we're going to discuss the book. So we tell you guys, like, hey, we're going to discuss the book. So it's up to you to not listen if you don't want to know. Yeah. But in real life, when we're recommending books, I think we both know how deflated the other person will get when they're like, really?
Yeah.
Because we just get so delighted by the process of the unfolding of a story.
Yes. Especially a book where the surprises are so good. That you want the person to have that experience.
Yes.
Like, that's a huge part of the delight.
Agreed.
Yeah. So your reaction, like, we've talked about it a little bit so far, but tell us more.
Yeah. So when I finished this book 15 hours ago and texted Sarah, like, okay, I'm done. I have thoughts. I think that I have named a few. One, this is filling the gaping hole that I had from my Crescent City 3 disappointment. Because I was really looking forward to having what I thought was the prescribed, like, surprise and delight. I don't know if I'm going to read the rest of the series immediately, because I think I'm going to save it for our break when we're not reading other stuff and we're done recording for a little bit. But that also gives me a chance to kind of savor, like, ooh, I'm basically going to binge the rest of the series and the prequel series all at once. So I think that's how my winter will be spent, and I'm very excited.
It's going to be good for winter. Something's cozy.
Yeah. So I also have a big project coming up. We're doing a big home renovation. So I feel like I'm not going to be doing as many outside things as possible. So I just feel like it's going to be a really good time for me to just, like, pop my earbud in and just deep dive. So I'm very excited about that. I haven't been excited to finish a series in a while. So that's another thought. I'm really excited for these themes to develop, because I'm already getting a sense that her world building and her, not character building in terms of individual characters, though that will be fun, the different kind of species that she's introduced. I love a good, like, these people do this, like, vampires are going to do this, the Wolven are going to do this, the Craven do this, the
Ascended?
No, what's
or the Atlanteans.
The Atlanteans are going to do that. And also I love that they're called the Atlanteans. And, we find out who the Dark Lord is at the end of the book. And so I'm so excited to really learn about who he is, because I know now that she was just sold a whole bucket of lies, and that there's half-truths and hidden truths. And so I'm really excited. I'm really excited.
I'm amazed at the restraint you have to not... You guys, the cliffhanger that this book ends on is so juicy. And it's not like a cliffhanger of like... It's not like as much a plot cliffhanger as like an emotional cliffhanger, I would say. And I've read this whole series. I think this is my third reread of this series. Before the sequel one I've read more. Or the prequel one. As I know what's gonna happen. And we finished reading this. I texted Jenny, I was like, I have to keep going. I can't stop. I need to find out what happens, even though I know what happens.
Yeah. I get it. I know, like, there have been book series that I've read in the past where I've definitely had that. So it's not that I don't understand that. I'm not quite at that level with this one. Mm-hmm. I'm delighted. If this is like an excitement level of 10, I'm at an 8.
Interesting.
A 10 for you, I'm at an 8.
I wonder if because I know what happens, I'm even more excited to read it. Like, I can't stop at that end point of the first book.
I also know that we have a whole schedule of other things we have to read. So maybe part of it is just like, I'm mentally prioritizing. Like, this is more self-control. This is going to be my reward after we record the rest of our scheduled podcasts. And then I can be like, okay, I can just truly read for fun. We'll do a little check-in pod about my thoughts at a later date. Or maybe we'll just do a full part 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe like several episodes.
Okay, fair. So my general reaction, loved it. Definitely going to continue. Super excited to see how everything pays off. I have no idea how she's going to fill 5 more books and a prequel series, so that's pretty cool.
There's a lot.
Because sometimes, I think with, what's the Violet and Xaden series? My brain today.
Fourth Wing, or the Empyrean series?
You just said Iron Wing, and I'm like, that's not it.
Mining
you and I kind of predicted, knowing that it's going to be 5 books, we kind of predicted the arc, and sometimes, I'd say more often than not, I can kind of see, like, okay, she's going to wrap this up, This one, I don't want to think too much about it. I just kind of want to let it be what it's going to be.
Let me tell you, you truly have no idea where it's going.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. And honestly, each book kind of like continues that. You're like, wait, I thought, oh no,
amazing.
More?
Awesome. Love it.
Like, this series is really like, this first book is like, there's a sweater and you pull the thread ever so slightly. And then you just keep pulling the thread as you keep reading. And then the prequel series starts knitting the sweater back together.
Cool.
Which is why I'm so obsessed.
Into it.
Yeah.
Here for
and
it.
You're like, oh shit, that's the sweater? And then that's why she needs to finish the prequel series before this series finishes.
So funny. I just totally, for 2 seconds, checked out because I've been having a conversation with my friend Katie about how we can listen to audiobooks and do like cozy crafts together. And I'm like, ooh, do I have to start crocheting again while I listen to this? I'm like, I'm just committed to listening to 12 books. I'm going to need something to do with my hands for all of those hours.
That's an amazing idea.
Thank you, ADHD.
Yes.
For that moment. Cool. Yeah. So those are my thoughts. I will get to the rest of it. I'm going to prioritize our plans first, which also is a little like, thank you for handing me 12 more books to read, Sarah, but I'm going to wait and do this on my own time.
I'm over here, I'm like a 5-year-old. I'm like, read it. No. I don't know
what you do. I'm sorry, but we're reading some other fun things, so we'll get to it.
It's an important exercise of patience.
Maybe we'll just have to open season 2 with...
Yeah.
Although we did kind of put forth, maybe we do a vampire arc in season 2.
Yes.
Maybe this will
be a little mini, like, set of episodes.
Yeah. I actually, part of that is because I want to know a little more about the critical analysis you, like, learned in this class that you took.
This class was amazing.
So I feel like I kind of want a little bit more of that.
Yes.
Which is why we need to do a vampire arc.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay, cool.
I mean, the thesis of the class is that you could, by tracing the way the vampire changes, you can trace cultural changes throughout time, specifically in regard to taboo sexuality and feminism.
Wow, I want to take that class.
Sumangala Bhattacharya, shout out, Pitzer College,
nice.
Genius. genius human being.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think you've also mentioned that professor before too, because I had to fact check her name for the transcription.
She was like, people were scared of taking her classes because she was tough. And I could not have been more obsessed with her. Nice. And I'm like, the tough teachers are often the good ones, you guys. Like, she's a hard grader, but like she just packed in so much thought, and it was just so good. And she was so funny. Yeah, nice. It was good. I mean, she taught a class on vampires. Like, she was great.
Yeah. I think there's something about a good teacher that will just like stick with you for the rest of your life. I love that.
Yeah,
love that. Great.
Okay. My reread thoughts. Yes. I don't have too many. I obviously love rereading. As you guys know, I love rereading this series. It's complicated enough where I don't remember everything totally, and so rereading it is kind of helpful to be like, oh, right, that's how this goes. And I think it's not so complicated, though, that you need to reread it to understand it, which is the case for some series. Yes. Where, like, Kushiel's Dart, no shade, I enjoyed that, but I think I think if I read it again, I would understand it a lot better. Yeah. That's not what happens here. I think you get it on first reread, maybe on second, you, like, it solidifies even more for you. I will say, not to jump down in my outline, but the style of writing occasionally bugs me in the dialogue. And as I reread, some of that kind of bothers me because it's a road I've trodden before. Yeah. But it's not so much that it prevents me from rereading it, because what is so good about it outweighs that stuff to me.
Yeah. I am remembering that now as you say it. She doesn't get whiny. That's not the right word, because she's not whining, but I think her tone, as you said, is really indicative of being a young, inexperienced, sheltered girl. Like, at the start of the book, she is a girl. Oh, yeah. Who happens to be venturing into a pleasure house to learn kind of what's happening.
She's a brave girl.
She's a brave girl, but she's very much, I would say, a teenage girl. And then through the process of the book, not to be too, trite about it, but she becomes a woman. She does. But like her inner dialogue and her outer dialogue tends to change a little bit. I will say, I hope that it does get more mature as it goes.
So that's not even what I was talking about, which is really interesting.
Fascinating.
I'm talking about literally the language use. It's very modern and very colloquial.
Oh, I see now.
In the following books, and this is not a spoiler, but the phrase "that was a random question" gets said a lot. And this is taking place in like ancient, like this is not a modern fantasy world. Yeah. But Armentrout kind of, she writes it as though it's kind of like kids on the street be talking. And I think that would really appeal to a lot of people. For me, it kind of pulls me out. And there's modern phrases used. At one point, old people are compared to like smelling of peppermint candies. And I'm like, in this vampire ancient world, would old people smell like peppermint candies? So it's things like that kind of like I struggle with a little bit. I would love if it was like a little bit richer in that regard. Again, the sequel series I think is more so like that.
Prequel?
Yes. No, it is a prequel series. I'm probably going to mix it up again because it was written after.
But the context is before.
Like thousands of years before. Yeah. From Blood and Ash. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I did see your note about that, and that was a thing that I noticed as well, where I was like, oh, they're not talking like they're, But I guess, can we categorically say that, like, is it a multiverse where maybe
she created the world. They talk like this.
Right, yeah.
So I'm not, like, saying she got it wrong. It's just, like, correct. Which is fascinating, right? Yeah. So, no, it's, like, in this
But
world,
it is a notice, because I also noticed it, too, because I was like, oh, their banter.
Yes,
is a lot more familiar than you would expect in a world that seems almost medieval.
Yeah, correct. That's exactly. Yeah. Well said, Jenny. Yes, that is exactly it. Yes.
I did also notice it. It didn't pull me out. I wasn't distracted by it, but I did notice it.
I was worried about that when I recommended it to you.
Because there's just like, not even a dissonance, but just a little tickle. Like, the way that these books in this setting usually play out, there's more of a formality.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah. But I enjoyed it. And I think it lent itself to the humor that you mentioned.
It does. And it also lends itself to the relationship development between the characters. Yes. Not just Poppy and Hawk or Poppy and Castile, but Kieran, other ones. Like, so it's and Tawny, it kind of like, because it's so familiar, it's almost like shorthand for us understanding the way that they're relating to one another. Yeah. And it's very charming.
Agreed.
Yeah. I do want to point out that I think I was like, Did Rebecca Yarros read this series? Because Fourth Wing there's a lot of similarity to what happens in Fourth Wing.
Yeah, I'm not picking up on that yet, but I probably will in future books.
Okay. Then maybe I shouldn't say too much more. With Violet and Xaden, with, us thinking Xaden is one kind of thing, and at the end of the book, you realize something else about him, and then you realize that the something else about him relates to the whole society you live in.
I feel like that can be said about other characters too. I'm not getting specifics in my brain right now, but so I guess I see what you're saying. Yes, now that you lay out
the lake in Fourth Wing where they land their dragons, and then the people who ride the griffins or whatever come, and Violet's like, what? And Xaden's like, sorry about this. You're about to realize some stuff about me. It's very similar to what happens in New Haven.
Yes, but I don't think they're exclusive to these two books. But I see what you're saying. Yes,
it's fresh in my mind.
We can be curious if Rebecca Yarros read this book.
So it
was like, ooh, that's an interesting plot device.
Correct.
I'm going to use that.
Correct. Yeah. Where you kind of you experience kind of that heartbreak and that shattering, like, wait a second, you're not who I thought you were, alongside the narrator.
Okay, but another thing that I'm realizing now, I, from the beginning, was like, Hawke is not who he says he is.
Yeah.
I think in Fourth Wing, you know that Xaden is on the other side.
That's true.
So maybe that's where...
But you don't know how.
But you don't know how.
Yeah.
But it was just a tickle where I'm like, Hawke is not who he says he is. I did not predict Hawke was who he ends up being. Mm-hmm. So that was fun. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going here.
Yeah. And Poppy really doesn't either. At multiple instances, people are like, Poppy, how do you know? Like, no, but what?
Yeah. But she was so sheltered. So to me, it makes sense.
No, totally.
It's totally believable.
It's not, there's zero buy-in on this. Like, you totally understand.
Yeah.
Because you're in Poppy's point of view.
Yeah, but in Fourth Wing,
that's a good point.
Like, you know he's on the other side, and when that happens, you're just like, oh. But then he kind of ends up being on kind of the same side in the, like, but you know what I mean? Like, they end up working together in the end. So, I get it. Parallels. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, Xaden.
I know. I'm just purposely not saying anything.
There's gonna be another instance, guys. Watch the video just for Sarah's restraints. Let's applaud her for not spoiling things for me.
If you guys want to praise me, that would be okay.
We know she has a praise cake. It's okay, Sarah. It's okay.
Games. Play me. Expose me. Now it's the porn situation all over.
I'm blushing too.
I am so red right now.
The question that my editing thing is going to give me, like, would you like to take out all the background noise for this? Is going to be so long with all of our laughing. Guys, please enjoy our laugh track. We're happy you're here.
Literally crime. That happens though when I.
Oh, me too.
Okay.
All right, let's bring it back. Let's get serious.
Vampires.
Very serious.
How this fits in the legacy of vampire fiction.
I'll let you take this away.
Okay.
You have far more critical analysis than I do.
Carmilla, Nosferatu, Dracula, Interview with the Vampire, jumping in leaps here, Twilight.
Yes.
That's generally, and if you've read any of those books, it goes from like monster, terrifying, nothing about this is sexually appealing, really, to Mormon, is the trajectory.
Yeah.
And this comes out after Twilight. And you notice that. And I don't mean that because there's no sparkling, there's no vegetarianism, there's no, like, neutering of the vampire in that way, but it is still a very neutered vampire. And what I mean by that is it's all sexuality and very little fear. And so, there's kind of two types of vampires in this world. The Ascended, who are more the traditional fear vampires, and they're, the bad guys in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And then the Craven are kind of like this more Nosferatu, like zombie, like mindless, just out for blood, extreme violence vampire. Yes. But then the Atlanteans are They need blood, but they don't need too much, and it's very sexual. And they have long lives, but they're not. You can kill them. And they kind of just like heal faster, and they're more kind of like superhero, almost more like Fae, honestly.
Yes, that was how I was reconciling this in my brain. And I didn't really make the zombie connection with the Craven, but now that I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. That's entirely how she created, like, yeah, we don't need to get too deep in the details. But I also, in how we've, in a recent pod, we're like, Fae and vampire are very similar in, I think, the reader's experience. Well, but in the reader's experience of like, why am I turned on by this? Why do I seek out this kind of content? There's shades of differences that delineate like Fae versus vampire.
Yes.
But that's how I was like, the Ascended or the vampire. And he also calls them the Vampiri.
Is that how they say it in the audiobook? It's spelled Vampry. So it's spelled like Vampry. Which is always bothered.
Vampiry is maybe. Because it definitely is like vampire with an E.
Interesting, because it's spelled.
Okay, but anyway,
yeah,
vamp.
It's spelled weird,
but it has vamp in it. So I'm like, okay, these are the traditional vampires.
Correct. They can't go out into the sun.
Right.
They have bloodlust. Mm-hmm. They can't control their bloodlust. They are monsters, basically, but they wear the skin of humans, so you can notice them by their black eyes, but other than that, they look indistinguishable from humans.
And this is what Poppy, she's going to become an Ascended through the whole thing.
She's supposed to be,
right?
Yeah.
That the maiden is going to have her ascension, and that's gonna.
But they also don't know. They don't know what's going to happen to her when she ascends. And they don't tell her.
And she doesn't know what's going to happen to her.
Correct.
But so anyway, the whole like ascending,
kind of a question.
The ascending thing is also an interesting word to me for this. It's like become higher than, like attain a new level of.
Yes.
The language for that was really interesting to me.
The manipulation of language is a big part of how the tyranny is enacted on part of the Ascended.
Yeah. Okay.
The Atlanteans have totally different words for a lot of these things.
Yes.
That you will learn in later books.
Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess there's not too much more to say about that. Honestly, like, Throne of Glass, the Fae with the have fangs and do bite each other. And it kind of honestly is a bit more comparable to the Atlanteans in that way. But like the enjoyment of blood, the sharing of blood, again, it becomes much more mythological as the series goes on. And I mean that literally in terms of gods and goddesses. So it's fascinating. It's really cool. I don't know of another series that blends vampirism with religion in that way. It's really interesting and I think very enjoyable.
Cool. Yeah, I was just doing a mental rundown because I almost feel like, is this an interview with the vampire thing where they feel like they've been abandoned by God? There's a vampire.
That's a thing in vampire fiction in general.
Yeah. So if we're really tying mythology into gods and goddesses in here, I'm going to be very interested to circle back to this because to me, my understanding of vampire lore and writing and stories is that, yeah, almost they've been forgotten by the gods or ignored by the gods.
Or they've forsaken the gods.
Or they have forsaken the god. Yeah. That it's a very other than godly thing. Ooh, okay, great. I'm very interested in how this plays out.
Yeah, and then I guess the final thing I wanted to talk about briefly is the prequel series. Again, which is not a direct prequel. The characters are not the same. There's some names you'll recognize. I will say that.
Just because we hear about the history in these. Never mind. Don't answer that.
Don't
answer that. Don't answer that. These creatures live for a very long time. Don't tell me.
Correct. It's separate, but it's extremely. The end of the 5th book, you're going to start to realize, hold on, there's a lot more than I need to know. And Jennifer L. Armentrout is like, hold my beer, read these books. and then you read them and you're like, oh my God. And you start knowing things that the characters from Blood and Ash don't know yet. And pieces clicking together that I cannot wait. I'm literally getting goosebumps.
I'm getting goosebumps just listening to you.
Thinking about the next book that comes out when Poppy becomes aware of some of the things that I now know as a reader having read the prequel series.
Got it.
The romance is as good, maybe even better than From Blood and Ash, and that's saying something because the From Blood and Ash romance is phenomenal. I'm just you wait, girl. Also, the spice. So this book is half a chili pepper, maybe.
Yes.
It gets way spicier.
Okay, exciting.
Oh yeah, baby.
Okay.
It gets muddy.
Nice. All right. You just want me to read this sooner.
Maybe. And the prequel series is equally smutty and delicious.
Lovely.
And just I really don't want to say too much. It's really good and it answers a lot of questions while still leaving a lot of mystery, which again, she's just so good at that. So, highly, highly recommend. I don't know of another series where something like this was done where, because a lot of times like prequels are written or whatever, and it's usually after the fact if a series is completed and not like, I think she was writing and she was like, I think this is my guess is that she was writing. She was like, oh crap, I need 5 more books to explain all of this that are separate. And she's like, oh, let's do it. Like,
yeah. Cool.
Okay. And the fact that again, she's completing that series first, I think is very important.
Okay. So I think that what you told me way back when is like, okay, read the From Blood and Ash series first. And then just like what you named, the author, you think, was like, wait a minute, I have all of this. Because there is a lot of history sprinkled in. And so my inkling is that she was like, oh, I could really use the opportunity to write the story that comes before chronologically and then continue to finish the series because she didn't want to pull out of the series. She wanted to do
They're
like
interwoven.
a backstory.
Yes. And like, no, literally they are going to be interwoven.
Okay. So, but you still say for me to read the From Blood and Ash series in its entirety.
I want you to know what questions to have so that when you get the answers in the prequel, you're like, oh shit.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that clear, both for me and for our listeners.
And the prequel is the Flesh and Fire series. This is Blood and Ash. That one's Flesh and Fire. A lot of the titles sound very similar. So rely on ye old Google to know which one goes where.
Especially for the soapbox looking out. Ye old Google.
Because it's like Flesh and Fire, Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, Angel of Flesh and Fire. That's not what it actually is. But like, or like Blood and Ash, Crown of Blood and Ash, Knife of Ash, Blood Face. Like it's
authors, please don't make your titles confusing in a series.
Just make them numerical.
Yes.
Blood and Ash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We would really appreciate that.
Yeah, but you know what? Jennifer, you do you.
You do you.
Love ya. Love ya, kid. She's also prolific, you guys. I've read a few of her other books. I plan to read more. And she's written so much. So I don't know how she does it.
I don't know.
I think she either is hooked up to a coffee IV or is like just one of the most gifted, just words pour out of her people.
Nice. I love it. We love a good genius.
We love a genius.
We love a genius. And thank you for providing us geniuses with all the delightful books.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be in conversation with a writer because I have the desire to be a writer because I do love the act of writing. I just don't have stories in me. And sometimes I'm just like, I'll just consume other people's stories. I've tried. I don't have stories in me. So I really appreciate when that literally I do consider this a divine.
Oh, absolutely.
Like co-creating thing.
This stuff is not easy, you guys. And for, again, I think to have the realization, and this is all supposition, could have been her plan all along, but I think to have the realization of, in order for this to be earned in this next book, I need 5 other books to get to this point, and to have the patience and the willpower to write, or 6 books even, all of that in order to make the next book, earned. Take notes, Sarah J. Maas, I think is incredible.
Yeah.
I think partly because she's not quite as popular as Sarah J. Maas, maybe there's more permission to be like that.
Maybe.
I'm not sure. Again, I recognize that SJM has a ton of pressure, probably the most pressure on her.
Yeah.
Which I think is, as we've said, really interfering with her writing process. And I think it's noticeable. So, yeah, I mean, read this fucking book, you guys.
I think that's the conclusion we both come to. Read the book. We want to know your thoughts. Don't give us spoilers unless you ask permission first.
You are allowed to, if they DM Spread Your Wingspan, I will interfere. I will see it first.
There.
So if you have a spoiler thought, you can DM at Spread Your Wingspan on Instagram. Sarah, I will respond. and I will filter out for Jenny what she sees. So, because I've read it all, so I'm happy to talk to you about all that stuff.
Yes. And also, if you want to send an email to hello@spreadyourwingspan.com, that's where I tend to be for the most part. And just put in the subject line, for Sarah, spoilers. And I won't look at it.
Perfect. Yeah, spoilers all caps.
Yeah. I love that we're telling our listeners what to do.
Well, we would really love to hear from you guys.
We do.
We've heard from some of you in person in our community, and it's delightful. So for those of you who aren't part of our in-person community, please feel free to reach out.
Talk to you.
We would love to talk to you. Yes.
All right. I think that wraps up our vampire notes for the day. Not forever, just for the day.
It does. Do you know what we're discussing next time?
Oh, if I look at my calendar.
It happened one summer?
I think so, if that's what's on our calendar.
Oh, no. It's Misadventures of a Curvy Girl.
Oh, yes, which I'm very excited to read. Another Sierra Simone. But I looked, there's like 30-something books in the series, and they're all written by a different author.
They are, yeah. And they're smaller. They're smaller, shorter books.
Yes, I'm excited to read it. The synopsis sounds fabulous.
Oh, it's juicy. It's spicy. Yeah. It's porn.
Awesome. Happy to get back to the porn. I think that for the rest of our syllabus, we're reading some more, I would put in the fun, like maybe beach reading.
A little lighthearted, yeah.
A little more lighthearted. Yeah. Yes, you have our list.
Yes. Yeah, we're ending a bit more on like more getting into serious romantasy.
Yeah, we wanted to do a little summer beach read series.
Yes. And one thing, noticing Misadventures of a Curvy Girl coming after From Blood and Ash, it's not talked about as much in this book, but Poppy is a larger bodied protagonist, as is the protagonist in the prequel series, which for all of you out there, know that that is rare, especially in romantasy. So highlighting that, forgot to say that in our pod today. It is not fetishized. It is not talked about that much, but when it briefly is, it's dope. So love to see a character who's not stick thin being the romantic lead.
Agreed.
We love to see it. We love to read it. And ditto with Misadventures of a Curvy Girl. That is exciting coming up now.
Yeah, I love the cover art of that book.
I don't even know what the cover art is.
It's a curvy girl.
It's a curvy girl. We love it. Yeah. We love it. Representation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Hooray. Go us.
Why is it that we can never wrap up the podcast gracefully?
Because we've lived our lives in a veil and we have no social skills.
No, we're going to work on our social skills. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time, guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Spread Your Wingspan podcast.
We would love to hear what you think about our topics today. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
You can find us on both with the handle @SpreadYourWingspan, and all of the links and more fun stuff are found on our website, spreadyourwingspan.com.
And if you have a book or author you want us to check out, send us an email at hello@spreadyourwingspan.com to tell us.
We hope you tune into the next episode.